This commentary is America's recipe for systemic disintegration. Will we disintegrate? Yes. Can it be stopped? No. Is that being negative? To the contrary. It's being honest, which means if you want to stay on the grid, if you want to keep buying their clothes, buying their food, buying their medicines, going by their protocols, whatever the protocol is, and using their credit cards, keeping your money in their banks, buying things you don't need and paying outrageous interest, then maybe this is nature's way of telling you, isn't it time you stopped and took an honest, introspective look at what you're supporting and what you got to drop the balls on, start over, maybe get off the grid? But very few people would do that. We have not shown any inclination to change. We want change, we want to be saved, but we don't want to be responsible for anything that makes us feel uncomfortable. So it doesn't matter whether it's food, drink, or anything else. Remember Johnny Depp? He's not a stupid person, but he's an irresponsible person. If he was a good husband and a good father, he would have valued the fact that his children should not be exposed to secondhand smoke. He should not have been drinking. Everything he did showed a poor example. It doesn't matter if you love someone. It matters, do they love themselves in a conscious and spiritual way? Because he could have been one of those leaders. It's not too late. But remember, every drink he's had has killed 1 million brain cells, kidney cells, liver cells, and heart cells. Every smoke that he's had has destroyed lungs. So with his drinking and smoking and drugs and central nervous system and inflammation in the brain, he's lucky to have 2 more years of life left, unless he radically changes. But he has shown no proclivity to change anything, because I haven't seen him have one whiff of discipline in his entire being. That's my own personal opinion. But more than ever before in American history, people are no longer able to trust anyone in government, especially their leaders. You can't trust industries. They lie. You can't trust any of the media. We've shown you that the media has been wrong about the Russia every single day, every single program led by the cheerleader for the deep state, Rachel Maddow. You can't trust anyone, even in Pacifica. I don't. There are some good producers, but what we could have been is relevant to this issue and challenged authority. We became culpable and cheerleaders to denounce people who were broadcasting any legitimate information. Well, take a look back. We were right on every single issue, fully documented. And you clowns, you didn't have the decency to do your own homework. You politicized the arguments and weaponized your thoughts. So this is just the ongoing history of Pacifica, and that's a shame. That's why you have no audience. But be that as it may, there will always be someone who tunes in, but not the numbers you used to when you were relevant, honest, and you had the courage to fight for really, real important issues and not allow petty politics or identity politics to stand in your way. Be that as it may, rather than put our confidence in official positions of power and influence, there is a better way to concentrate our focus. That is, we should allow history, independent science, and substantiated, provable facts be the only arbiters we need. After all, if someone's been wrong about Russia collusion every single day, as they all have, every single one, New York Times and all, if they've been wrong about misinformation in the Ukraine war, they have. If they have misguided us and not made the genocide in the Middle East, including first in Ukraine, but then also in the Middle East, in Syria, in Libya, in Yemen, if they've been behind all these coups and then hire the people responsible for the coups to be on MSNBC and CNN as their chief intelligence spokespersons, if they lied about everything involving COVID, if they lied about weapons of mass destruction, then what in the world would you imagine would make them suddenly be truthful about anything else? So without being political or partisan or biased, we can now review the official narrative and determine what was true, false, and remains unproven. We were told there were enormous numbers of deaths among the elderly to justify emergency measures to rapidly develop novel drugs and new vaccines. However, the evidence shows just the opposite. The vast majority of deaths in hospitals, critical care centers, nursing homes were people who died from pre-existing comorbidities that may have been complicated by SARS-2 infection. Even Bill Gates, on yesterday's program and the day before's program, said in this 20-second piece, oh yeah, we didn't know that it would really be as serious for older people or as non-serious for young people. Really? With all the thousands of people that you're paying at all these institutes, including the World Health Organization, that is a criminal organization by any measure, and grossly incompetent in everything it does, everyone knew the truth. Every doctor, nurse knew the truth. They did not see hospitals filling up with infants, toddlers, with COVID and dying, teenagers and young healthy athletes filling the hospital beds and emergency rooms and dying. But comorbid patients in nursing homes and hospice care, yes. How about a hospice care just filled with nothing but end-stage cancer patients? When they died, every single one, COVID. But it wasn't COVID. So we were told that there were enormous numbers of deaths among the elderly to justify emergency measures to rapidly develop this therapeutic model that we used. Yet we now know that the vast majority of deaths in hospitals, critical care centers, nursing homes were people who died not from COVID. They may have tested positive with COVID, but that was a false positive test. In addition, the early accepted course of treatment, quarantine and oxygen therapy, was shown to be largely ineffective. But they didn't offer people pure oxygen therapy they could have done at home. You can buy an oxygen tank with a mask, and you get 100% oxygen just sitting in your chair and working at your desk. They didn't offer that. No, they offered intubation, and they offered a drug, one of the most toxic drugs ever created. And yet, that's the drug everyone going to the hospital was given. And so they provided us with ineffective and dangerous therapies, only to further complicate rising mortality rates. Moreover, if a patient in hospice care with terminal cancer or COPD became infected, the death would have been ruled COVID. This manipulation of cause of death certificates presented an image that the virus was far more lethal than it actually was. Wasn't it Bill Gates who just said, oh yeah, this virus is, similar to, but not exactly the same as the flu virus? Then why didn't we treat people with high-dose vitamin C intravenous and vitamin D, zinc, and some herbs like astragalus if they had a flu? Only 7%, I repeat, only 7% of reported COVID deaths can actually be associated with the virus as the primary cause without comorbidities. Who says? CDC and the FDA. It's on their website. Many medical professionals have reported that the CPR diagnostic test used throughout the world was remarkably flawed, with very high rates of false positives. It has been known for a couple of decades that PCR is an unreliable diagnostic tool for infectious diseases. Had we not relied upon PCR, the case rate would never have warranted such a hysteric reaction. In the absence of novel drugs targeting SARS-2 virus specifically, nor a vaccine, health officials held firm to the story that there was no effective treatment. In fact, you were punished if you sought a treatment as a medical doctor to give it to your patients. Even if all your patients, in one case 10,000 patients, by one physician, only 4 died. And those were people who got the treatment at the later stage. But all the early treatments, not a single patient died. Can any government in the world claim the same? Can the CDC, the FDA, any hospital? No. But should we trust an individual board-certified physician? Yes, but we won't, because that would change the scenario. So then why wouldn't other doctors say, well, hold on, if you treated 10,000 patients, not one died except for the 4 that got later treatment, that means you have a cure rate of 99.997%. Yes. Well, no one has that. Well, he did, and then others did. But let's just scrub them, erase them, attack them, neglect them. That's exactly what all the major media, the medical journals, and every governmental agency did. So then ask yourself, who can you trust? if the people who said trust us, or authorities, act more like imbeciles? Some of the stupidest human beings imaginable run our agencies. As a result, hundreds of thousands of Americans' lives were lost unnecessarily. Worse, this may have been the first time in American medical history when large numbers of orthodox physicians and medical experts, the large majority who are pro-vaccine, were attacked, ridiculed, and canceled for suggesting early treatment with FDA-approved off-label drugs such as hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin. Any doctor who spoke out was attacked. There were no exceptions. Locking down entire cities and quarantining large numbers of presumably infected people who were not actually infected, they had no symptoms whatsoever. Well, there's still a case, according to the New York Times. What happened to its journalistic integrity? Where were the so-called Pulitzer Prize winners? Why didn't they investigate? In less than an hour, they collected all the information they wanted to have challenged the official narrative. Where were their interviews with all these physicians who had no controversy in their entire background, who were just mainstream orthodox physicians, pro-vaccine physicians, who suddenly started seeing the contradictions in the data as it began to come out? Throughout the pandemic, depression and anxiety, suicides because of depression and anxiety, alcohol consumption, and drug overdoses reached record levels. In fact, for people under 50, more people died of drug overdoses, and that includes not just the previous high drug death from OxyContin, but also of all the other drugs that are now flooding into the United States. More people died from that than from COVID. Shouldn't someone have stopped for a moment and saying, hold on, are more people dying from our protocols of quarantining and deprivation than are dying from the disease? Of course, and any reasonable, responsible, half-intelligent physician or scientist would have agreed. But that's not who we have in charge. Clearly, what we had was the most formidable propaganda campaign in American history. In fact, in the history of the world. COVID vaccines were called safe and effective. But this was indisputably erroneous. Clearly, when the major institutions that create and execute national health policies are repeatedly wrong and misguided, the public quickly loses trust. Is that why Moderna said that they have 30 million vaccines they can't even give away? They're going to have to trash them? Would have been a good idea to trash all your vaccines. Because now the science is in. And every single one of the scientific peer-reviewed studies coming in every week shows another hole in the official dialogue. These public health debacles, as well as other issues, cost taxpayers enormous sums. The latest is a $40 billion aid package to dump into the Ukrainian government's losing war with Russia. If we really wanted to see peace in Ukraine for the poor suffering citizens there who've lost their lives and their homes, then send in the peacekeepers and make a treaty. But everything humanly possible to keep this war going, which will ultimately end with Russia winning the eastern borders, which is what they wanted from day one, and could have been prevented. All the evidence, all the forensic evidence shows that Russia had warned the United States, NATO, and Ukraine, stop militarizing at our border. Stop killing people in the Donbass, Russian-speaking Ukrainians. 14,000 were slaughtered. Nothing reported in the American media. So you see, it's the story you're not told. It is unfathomable that supporting a nation militarily and economically, which has been ranked as the most corrupt in Europe, would take precedence over the severe crisis in the domestic economy. Congress's aid package becomes all the more ludicrous, and the legislators who voted for it so disingenuous and egregious when we take into account the U.S. increasing inflation, skyrocketing energy costs, and widespread shortages in infant formula. I'll have a conversation about that tomorrow. We're going to say goodbye to our WB audience. We're going to continue on at the top of the hour at prn.live. Americans will recognize money spent wisely and in their interest when it produces positive results. However, now we witness the majority of expenditures failing to resolve problems. Rather, bailouts, more often than not, further enrich billionaires, oligarchs, private corporate interests, instead of resolving any of the country's serious struggles. The media, on behest of the government, distracts us with worrying debates of critical race theory and gender politics. As a consequence of decades of consistent budgetary and domestic failures, one does not need to be an oracle to envision the future. All that is necessary is to examine our constraints and foibles. We are now facing a perfect storm of pain, suffering, and destruction, financial inequality and poverty, global warming, environmental migration, and disease pandemics. Yet when any reasonable person questions what can be done, we are told we are fine and the best and brightest are on hand to solve our problems. However, in no small measure, it was the best and brightest during the past 60 years who were the architects of the crisis we face today. Why do you think you have such a big drug problem and a crime problem in small communities throughout the South? That's because they gutted the industries that have been there providing a living wage and a standard of care for the average citizen for decades, all gone by rich people. Do they ever write about that? Never a word. We need to step back to have a purview of the larger picture in order to observe what we as individuals can do to prevent and mediate the catastrophes we will all face. This begins by reaching agreement that those in power are the structural problem and can never come up with satisfying solutions. An optimist will say that our socio-political and ecological conditions will improve. Prove it to me. Show me what is being done that will reverse the 2.6 or 3.2 carbon increase when we're supposed to be going in the opposite direction. We're creating more communities. We're deforesting more of the hardwood lumber. We're taking away carbon sinks. We're increasing our production of meat and plastics. And as a result, global warming increases. So what do? Invite Davos to invite Greta come in and yell at him for another 5 minutes? And they say, oh, good, thank you. We got the message. No, they have no message. You first have to have a brain to have a message. These people are probably genetically engineered not to think for themselves a long time ago. And since the nation is so viciously divided between clashing ideologies, this is just wishful thinking. The pessimist, on the other hand, reflects back upon the previous administrations since Eisenhower and declares nothing fundamental will change. It will only worsen. The climate optimist says that they are lucky their home has not been swept away in a flood or burnt to the ground from a wildfire out in New Mexico, for example, right now, or leveled by a hurricane. For the moment, their lives are safe, so everything will be fine in the future. That's delusional. The pessimist focuses upon the reality about what happens when we lack a national or worldwide Marshall Plan or to curb our impending climate-induced crisis, or just to have the average person say, isn't it time that I, as this homeowner, honestly and reflectively said, I'm not living in the right place for the future, and then took the time and energy to find better places, more sustainable places to move? Yes. Is that going to happen? Just to the contrary. The worst places you could possibly live in America are the ones that are now exploding with new growth. Someone obviously didn't get the message, but it's a message people don't want to know. It was Fritz Perls who said a fear of knowing is a fear of doing. So as long as I don't know that there's a problem, I don't have to deal with it. Throughout the U.S., people are waking up to a once-in-a-lifetime experience that our body politics are built upon a fragile foundation held together with scotch tape and paper clips. Others are waking up to the reality that they may be evicted from their homes and apartments tomorrow. About 75% of restaurants and bars closed during the pandemic will never reopen again. Yet the sole message fed us daily by the mainstream media is that the only important issue on hand is to remain fearful of a virus, get tested, and keep up with your COVID vaccine boosters. Governors, state legislators, and mayors contribute to the collective hysteria and are determined to pass bills to impose strict penalties on those who resist. Google, Facebook, Twitter, and most importantly, Wikipedia do their best to ensure that no medical experts, advocates, or common citizens with data or facts on social platforms contradict the official health policies narratives. In the meantime, the nightly news, depending upon the political ideology of the networks, airs politicized rhetoric and images of Washington spin for that day to keep the masses paralyzed in a state of fear and helplessness. If the average person asks what are the top 10 or so issues that our nation should focus upon, barely anything found in the mainstream media will be on that list. Why? And why I will go into on tomorrow's program. I'm going to have through with this discussion today in this commentary. Think well on what I've said, because everything I predicted has come true. Everything I've said 10 years ago has come true today. And I don't see anything good happening anywhere unless there's a tsunami at the election to throw the people in power out of office, Democrat, Republican alike, unless it can be shown that that person's experience every day was working for their constituents. But that hasn't been the case on either side of the aisle. That has to change. If it doesn't, you don't have a future. You only have a series of lurching crises and dramas to which no one would be held accountable, nobody would take the blame, and you'll be left as a victim. I'm Gary Null. Thank you all for listening and have a nice day.